Are you in the rental market? Kestrel Property Management would love to help you find great space in downtown Moscow. Give us a call at 208-997-3070 or visit our website at kestrelpm.com.
This is the Kestrel Country Podcast, where we discuss the people, places, and events all around Kestrel Country. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Kestrel Country Podcast. We're grateful to have you joining us once again. I'm your host, Mike Church, joined by my lovely wife and co-host, Catherine.
Hello, hello.
And today we had another team member on, Kris Smith. Kris Smith. For those of you who don't know or haven't met Kris, you will hear pretty quickly
That you need to meet him.
Also that he is not from Moscow.
No.
We're going to leave that to later in the podcast. You interpret his accent.
I think you'll figure it out pretty quickly.
Kris joined us not quite a year ago, this fall. And we're really grateful to have him on the team. Kris, as you will find out in this interview, brings a wealth of experience.
Oh, yeah.
From
Financial planning,
work on Wall Street,
sales management,
aerospace, cable industry, negotiating contracts with large multifamily units. I mean, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And Kris is a people person.
He's the guy you want in your corner.
Yeah. So it's, he's also, you could talk to Kris for hours and get all kinds of stories. We scratched the surface of some of the stories with him today, but just wanted everyone to be able to get to know Kris and what he brings to the table, and his love of the area, his love of history, real estate, of helping people, and
food. His love
and
of food.
Talk about food, and particularly oysters. Man, I was so hungry for oysters.
We got to
when we
eat
got
oysters
done.
With him down in San Francisco when we were at the Realtor conference last year, and that was a blast.
Yeah, it's maybe funny to talk about oysters, when we're living in the inland Northwest, but you'll have to wait till close to the end to hear some stories about oysters. So, hope you enjoy getting to know Kris.
And if you want to get to know more, just give him a call.
Yeah, or stop by the office anytime. So let's get into our conversation with Kris Smith. Kris, thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Listen, it's my pleasure. I like the stage. I'm not shy around the mic.
Well, we've been wanting to get you on here for a long time and just talk to you about your background, what brought you here, a little bit of real estate, but here's some stories from Kris Smith.
Yes.
For those of you who don't know, for people who don't know you, your stories around the office are always welcome, and you've been really fun to have on the team. So grateful to get you in front of the microphone finally on the Kestrel Country Podcast.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I am full of stories, and some people would say I'm full of other things too, but it really has to do with age and experience. I mean, you guys now recognize how much more you know about life than you did in your teens or your early 20s or whatever age group you're in. You just gain knowledge and experience, and I think they go hand in hand. So anytime somebody mentions something, I normally have a story that will kind of correlate or parallel what we're talking about. So, so it's a pleasure for me to be here. I really enjoy working with the team here at Kestrel Realty Group, because I believe in some of the corny sales acronyms that I've grown to really embrace and love, like Together, everyone achieves more. So, I'm a big believer in the team concept. But first things first, I guess I'll probably tell you, and I'm going to give everybody cheating crib notes. You can go to KestrelRealtyGroup.com, and on the top of our toolbar, you'll see Why Kestrel, and then you'll see listed under there all the guides. So there's each one of us on the Kestrel team has a nice little bio on our website. So I'm trying to do a little mini commercial and drive everybody to our website.
That was a good commercial.
Yeah, and I think it's important because in the real estate business, like in most businesses, it's a relationship. It's a relationship type of business. And I would encourage everybody, whether you're a avid Kestrel fan or just somebody that's out there looking for something to do that in regards to real estate and realty, go to the websites of some of the people that you're considering doing business with, because what you'll see there, especially in everybody's own personally crafted bios, what they're really about and how they approach life and how they approach, their business. So for me, the reason why I'm here at Kestrel Realty Group is because I've been fortunate enough to have some really great mentors in my past. In particular, I would say financial guidance. It would come from my mother and my mother's side of the family. She's a North Carolinian by birth. And her family was what would be considered a well-to-do family in their community. In fact, my mother's family deeded most of the land that the town of Mount Olive was founded around back in I guess it was the mid-1800s. So, and they were big landholders, big landowners, and I've always had a strong interest in the land and also history, which is a lot of people don't know about me, is that I'm a big lover of history. And for a man of color to be quoting Robert E. Lee is unique and funny, but I do believe that, like Robert E. Lee said, history teaches us to hope. So when you know your history and you know where you come from and you understand what's going on around you from the historical perspective of things, I think you're a more well-rounded person. Yeah. But back to how I got to Moscow.
Yeah, we'll back it up even further.
Yeah,
so history of Kris Smith. So where did you grow up?
Start?
I grew up in Amityville, Long Island, New York, and my father's family had been there for multiple generations. My mother was from the South, and she was a college student at what is the first traditional black college ever founded in the United States. So she went to Shaw University. I think it was founded by some Methodists back in the day for people of color to attain higher education during the pre-Jim Crow era of the South.
And that was down in North Carolina, or
North Carolina, okay. Raleigh, North Carolina. So she came up during her summer breaks between semesters, between the spring semester and the ensuing fall semester, and went to work at a sanitarium in my father's hometown, which was very, very common then. People had to raise money for tuition, so almost everybody broke out and got summer jobs. So she wound up here, and she had kind of followed the path that some other students in finding places to work, gainful employment during the summer so they could contribute to tuition. And that's where she met my father. They fell in love. I've got 2 older brothers and a younger brother. You know how that whole story goes. But yeah, raised in Amityville on Long Island. Spent some years overseas as a young kid in Japan during the early stages of the Vietnam conflict. My dad has a history. He's a Tuskegee Airman, and he's in aerospace, and Long Island was a hotbed for military aerospace. It's one of those cradle of aviation type places. So that's where I grew up.
Not being from that area, I would have never thought about Long Island being kind of aviation territory. Yeah. Because you worked some in aviation, right, early on, and then, so your dad was in aerospace.
Right.
But what about the cab business?
Yeah.
Because you have a lot of stories about the cab business. How did that fit into your family?
Yeah.
Well, so my dad comes from a family where there were very few opportunities at the time. And my grandfather decided with one of his uncles to start a livery service in the Lower East Side of Manhattan back in the days at the turn of the century. And then when they kind of matriculated out to the suburbs, my grandfather had started a livery service. He wasn't a highly educated man, and it was an opportunity for him to feed his family. So they went into the cab business, and my dad being the eldest son, the second oldest child, when he came of age, he decided that he was going to, help his father and his siblings, because he had 4 brothers and 5 sisters, so 10 in this family, very large family. He thought it was important to kind of contribute financially, and that was the easiest thing. It segued into that business. And of course, I grew up around it, and I idolized my father and my grandfather, so I always wanted to be involved. So I started at a very early age, at about the age of 10, dispatching cabs.
Wow.
In my hometown. Yeah, so you had a 2-way radio system back in the day. This is prior to cell phones or anything else. And so I'd sit in an office, we'd get the phone calls in from customers, and then I'd have to figure out who was where to pick up the call. So you had to kind of envision a map of the town you lived in, and also kind of time study where everybody was, picking up and dropping off passengers.
Wow.
And assign the correct cab to pick up that customer and keep the cabs moving in kind of concentric circles throughout the shift.
And you were 10.
And I was 10. But it wasn't like I just sat there cold by myself. I had either an older cousin or an aunt or an uncle or my grandfather himself sitting there coaching me through it until I got the gist of it. So yeah, car service, the transportation industry is kind of like was in my blood from a very early age.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it's nuts.
I'm sure there's a lot of other stories about the cab business and growing up in it. But
the biggest stories came when I became, like, at a very ripe young age of 16, I started driving a taxi. So that was highly unusual. But as a family member and my desire to do it, my father and my grandfather allowed me to drive a cab when most kids are.
Just learning how to
so
drive.
you did that during high school?
I did that during high school. I actually did it probably well into I'd say almost to my 40s, off and on, trying to help them. When I was career-based out of Manhattan, a quick story was one morning I called for a taxi to take me down to the train station so I could get my commuter train rather than me going down there. I forgot whether it was inclement weather or otherwise. But when I got the cab, it was late, and I could hear on the 2-way, they were just jammed up. So from that point forward, even though I didn't personally need that second job to do this, I felt a huge obligation to my family because they had basically supported me. So I started working for them again. I said, you guys need help. So it's hilarious, but I would get on a suit to go into Manhattan to work my regular office sales job, right, in the securities industry. I had a cab stationed at my residence. I would get in that cab. I would drive from about 5:30 in the morning until the next 2 or 3 trains that would get me to my job on time. I'd park the cab on an off lot near the train station and run across the parking lots to get my train so I could get to work on time.
Wow.
And more than once, I'd get on the train because I had to walk through all the cars to get to the front of the train, and people would like look up from their newspapers or from their coffee and see me, and I could see the question mark and the thought bubble over their head. And I would have to say to them, yeah, I just dropped you off about 10 minutes ago for the train. I was your cab driver. And that light bulb would go off over their head. They go, oh! It used to be the most fun thing to experience, is just the shock on people's face saying, what? So anyway, yeah, so I worked that business for a long, long time. And it evolved to the point where it was hard for a smaller cab or transportation company to survive as some of the bigger cab companies came into the local area. And that kind of that kind of spelled the end of that whole story. Yeah. By time, I would say by time my uncles and my aunts had all safely retired, like we'd gotten them to the point where they could retire, that's when it was time to close the doors. Just the economies of scale of doing business in a metropolitan area, especially the insurance or the liability side.
Oh, yeah.
It was time to close the doors. Yeah, because there was no one else of my generation that had a keen interest in doing it, and I frankly didn't want to continue and give up what I was doing, which I loved as much or more, to pursue that business, keeping that business afloat.
Which was, you were working in Manhattan.
Yep.
In the securities industry.
That is correct.
So what exactly does that mean?
Well,
what were you doing?
What happened was, as I was getting my undergraduate degree, I had gotten to the point where I could take adult education courses at the college I was going to. And then, at that particular point in time, financial planning had started to come into play in the vernacular and in the consciousness of most investors. Most people wanted to be a little more broad-based in their understanding of things, and they wanted somebody that could be a guide to them for all the different financial aspects in their life. So these were some of the course curriculums that were available. I decided to take them. And when I realized how much money these guys were making, because I was still in aerospace and I was a production control manager at a defense contractor, I realized, wow, these guys are making serious money. And going through the course, like the electives, it was incredible how much they did not know about the other pieces of the financial puzzle for the average person. And I realized, hey, these guys get up and put their pants on the same way I do in the morning, one leg at a time. And again, going back to experience is a great teacher and it builds knowledge. They had a lot of experience in their own disciplines, but they really didn't understand the full financial picture. So it was very helpful for me to observe this and say I could make a go of it. So I decided to go into financial planning. And I failed miserably. Yeah, because what I didn't understand was I really didn't know how to market myself or, my skill set. And so I kind of fell flat on my face. And I was continuing to work full-time in production, in manufacturing, while I basically struggled as a financial planner. And I realized I didn't have selling skills and I didn't have marketing skills, and that was sorely needed, and I couldn't afford to hire somebody to do it for me. So I wound up answering a classified ad in the old traditional newspapers that said, "Come work for the big man and become $1 million producer." So I said,
Big man.
Yeah, the big man.
Who was the big man?
That was a guy named Stuart Travis, who had been on Wall Street for decades. And so I answered the ad. I went and interviewed with the guy. The guy sold me, and I went to work for him. But within about 4 or 5 months, I was very uncomfortable in the environment. I didn't think that they were really doing the right thing by investors. And I started looking for an exit strategy, and one of the other guys that worked there, a guy considerably older than I was, had suggested that I try to get recruited into a financial consultant, which was kind of a branding of financial planning, a financial consultants training group with American Express. So I called him and I just pitched the guy over the phone, who was the sales manager in a local branch in Manhattan, and I got hired into their financial consultant training program, and that's where I really learned how to sell and market in a more ethical way, should I say, than what I was being trained to do, working for the big man. So
anyway. It's phone sales. You're doing a lot of work on the phone. You're selling individual securities to people,
right,
and that kind of thing. How long did you do that?
Oh, I did that for about 4 years, and then I moved out of the Manhattan madness and that commute and everything, and I took a job with a small firm on Long Island. In the financial services industry, they consider a small firm that's not a big brand a boutique firm. So I worked for a small firm out there, and I eventually got the position of being their syndicate manager. And a syndication is when investment bankers get together and they're going to bring a security public, typically stock, common stock, or it could be a bond, what's known as a debt offering, which are all of your bond classifications. But when they do that, when they securitize a company's financial needs, they have to have a selling group to put that into the hands of investors, whether it's institutional investors or regular, Main Street storefront, what they call the retail investor, which would be us, the common man. So the syndicate group is the group of investment firms that are in charge of the distribution of a new security into the hands of individual investors. So I was doing syndicate management, which meant that my small firm, my job was to look at our entire book of business and determine who was going to get the issuance of the new security. And I did that for a while until all good things sometimes end, and it wound up that another firm acquired our firm, and they had no need for two syndicate managers, so the acquiring firm typically takes over. And I wound up in the cable industry because I saw that as an up-and-coming, very valuable asset. I call it a sexy utility, if you will. So all of us that need broadband at home, the cable industry, I thought, was the best provider of that. I didn't say it was the cheapest or anything, but I thought there was real value in the cable industry, so I went to work in that industry.
And then you were there for how many years?
About 15, 16 years.
Okay.
So I had about 10 years overlapping in aerospace and manufacturing. And of course, from a very early age, I was in the transportation industry, and that continued right through my early 40s, I would say. And also, I had gone from aerospace and in manufacturing into financial planning, and came out of the securities industry, the financial services industry, into the cable industry. And and all interspersed throughout was, going back to my background, was the value of real estate. Because going back to my mother's side, and they were pretty careful and they were pretty successful when it came to managing their own real estate affairs. And they had been landowners because they were part of the native population that basically owned all the land before, people came and took it from them or bought it from them.
Yeah.
So my mother and her family were always involved in real estate. So my mother and all of her sisters and their husbands lived here in New York and were teachers and other professionals, and they had real estate. And one by one, as they kind of peeled off into retirement, some of their real estate holdings, were still around New York, but they went back south to retire, cost of living, et cetera, close to family and friends and home. And so I had opportunities at times to manage real estate for people. Yeah. And I did that, my own property, and then property management was kind of in my blood, interspersed throughout that. So I've always been juggling multiple things throughout my career.
Yeah, so how did you make it west? What brought you west?
It's hilarious. First of all, another part of my background is the fact that as a believer, we as a family started to gravitate more and more towards Reformed theology. So we were like pioneers of homeschooling in the hotbed of the public school system of New York and the suburbs of New York City. And my mother and her siblings, a lot of them are teachers, grade school, high school principals. And but we saw the value in looking at our Reformed theology background. We saw the value in kind of taking control and responsibility for our kids' education. And we thought it was important that we had more of a hand in that. So we made the decision relatively early on. So my children are now in their mid-30s to late 20s, very late 20s. And at the time back then, it was almost revolutionary, especially surrounded by so many teaching professionals in our family in the public school system, to make the decision to leave the public school system and to homeschool. Because that was like people were aghast in our community, especially our family and relatives. But we thought it was really important, and that Reformed theology led us more and more to looking for more Reformed thinking churches. So we were doing that, and eventually I became an elder in a church that was looking for denominational affiliation, so to speak. So we wound up looking into, me and the fellow that we had called, we wound up looking into a couple of different denominations, and it was the suggestion of a friend to look into the CREC. And that's how we actually came into the CREC. It was so strange for most people, even in the CREC, was a church, a small church in New York, interested in the CREC as a denominational affiliation. But one thing led to another, and as our children, grew and married, they came out here to Moscow, Idaho to live. And my daughters are, the mothers of 6 and 7 children, and my son is out here too, and he's got 2. So all of my grandchildren,
all of your how many?
All of my 17 grandchildren are here in Moscow, Idaho.
Oh.
So I got out west because providentially, we were looking to make this move about 10 years ago. And there didn't seem to be a good fit for me, vocationally or professionally at the time. Again, I was in the cable industry almost full bore at this time, and also serving as an elder at a CREC church plant on Long Island. And we kind of felt like it was kind of like laying out a fleece, if you will. We figured if God really was going to guide and direct us to be out in Moscow, Idaho, as much as we wanted to be, it would have to be very evident to us. So, a couple of job opportunities had come my way, but I didn't make the final cut for the job, or we just felt like, the offer financially wasn't really a good fit for us. And then one time, and this is like probably 2008, maybe 2009, we'd come out to visit. Somebody was born. My lovely wife, Levade, had flown out here to spend a couple of weeks with the new baby and mom and trying to help with the other children. And we made the decision for her to apply for the job as the church secretary at Trinity. The person that was there was leaving. I forgot what the reason was. But I said, yeah, apply for the job. I said, it'll be great, and it'll further spur me along to try to find something that's appropriate for my skill set. So that didn't, it was kind of in the back of my mind, but I didn't really think that she was going to get called, get the job. So she gets the call, and I said, great. So now I'm going to seriously look. In the interim, the company I worked for, the cable company in New York, acquired a western states footprint that covered Montana, Wyoming, and parts of Colorado and parts of Utah. I was the senior sales manager there at the time, and they asked me to start sitting in on these C-suite meetings on what are we going to do how are we going to manage this property that we've just recently acquired. And then it came down to the point where they wanted to take some key people from New York and establish the legacy system in New York out there in this new footprint. And nobody really expected me to take the job, but I took the job. So the closest I could get to our family is Missoula, Montana, which ironically enough, now my wife, think about this now, she's working as the church secretary, and I'm moving out to Missoula, Montana. This is all happening within about 5 or 6 month window. And we actually met with the elders at Trinity and said, so what do you think? Should I be coming over on the weekends from Missoula, Montana, working professionally there, and spend time here, or do you think it's wiser for us, for Levada, to resign from her position here and move back to Missoula with me? Which is, after we thought about it, prayed about it, that was the way we went. We went back to, she resigned from Trinity and moved back with me to Missoula, Montana. So that's how I got out here.
So you're close enough for weekend trips and visits to the grandkids and
Yeah,
everything,
yeah.
but
Which is
hanging
great.
out in Missoula, Montana. What was that like transitioning from
New York to
living on Long Island your whole life
Yeah,
to a western mountain town like Missoula?
it was heaven. It really was. We had long ago. First of all, we missed our family terribly here in Moscow, Idaho, and wanted as much as we could to spend more and more time out here. And we were just trying to figure out how that was going to look, what it was going to be like. So when that opportunity came up, I jumped all over it. And when I got to Montana, it's like Idaho. It's a sparsely populated state, and it's just stunningly beautiful, like the Palouse. It's almost like for the first, I'd say, year that I was in Missoula, Montana, I had a huge territory to manage. So I had all the way down to the Idaho border, down the Bitterroot Valley, to Hamilton and beyond, really literally to the border, and all the way up to the Canadian border.
Wow.
North of Whitefish. And then all the way across to a town called Chinook, which Chinook Winds, I guess. And it's on the High Line. It's about 18 miles south of the Canadian border is what's known as, I think, Route 2, the High Line, which is a very high up on the map highway system. So I had a huge part of Montana to be in control of. So it was a lot of windshield time. So I got to drive through all this beauty of western Montana, the Rockies, the eastern front of the Rockies, and then the plains on a regular basis. So I spent literally most of my time smiling like an idiot, I guess, for the first year or so that I was in Montana. It was just beautiful.
Trading a commute in New York for a commute through the mountains
wide
of
open.
Montana.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then you guys made it to Seattle.
Right.
That was another move.
Yeah, that was I would say a quick detour, even though it was about a 2-year stint. What had happened was when the cable system was acquired by another company. In fact, they're the local provider here, Charter Spectrum. So Charter was originally a St. Louis-based cable operator. And we had hired somebody from Time Warner Cable to be the chief operating officer where I was working in New York called Cablevision, which is now Altice. They were acquired by another company. So there's always this pattern of one, acquisition after another. It's just the way big business is. And so Cablevision decided to hire this guy from Time Warner to be their chief operating officer. He in turn then, after about 3 or 4 years, was hired by Charter Communications out of St. Louis to become their chief executive officer. And so he was in an expansion mode, and the company Cablevision, now Altice, was in a contraction mode in the cable industry. He acquired that entire footprint. Now, their legacy system had a different hierarchy of who should be where and how many people should be reporting to them. So how many direct reports you had, how many people in general, in total underneath you, that dynamic changed. So what they wound up doing was they offered to buy out about 4 or 5 people that had come from New York out to manage those western properties. When they acquired it, they moved their headquarters to Connecticut from St. Louis, and I was one of the people they offered the buyout. They offered me a position in the company in, of all places, Vancouver, Washington, which is just north of the Oregon-Washington border.
Yeah, Portland, basically.
Right across the river from Portland. And I declined it. I think it was prideful of me at the time. I didn't want anybody telling me what to do. I wanted to stay in Montana close to family in Idaho, but they weren't having it. So I took their offer and ran with it. And I wound up staying in sales and marketing, and I was selling advertising for a local television affiliate, which is a reach medium. So it's really important in these big Western landscapes that you have, even more so than radio, television has the greatest reach to reach audiences. So it's pairs of eyeballs. How many eyeballs get to see the advertising. So I wound up in advertising for a while, and lo and behold, one of my associates back from New York took a new position in the Seattle area for Comcast and asked me to come work with him because he needed help and he wanted somebody that he knew when he was going into a new region. So I worked for him for 2 years in the capacity of writing contracts for access agreements for the residential market. So I can't get away from real estate, right?
Yeah,
Nope.
that's right. All
So-
paths
All
lead to
paths
real
lead
estate.
to.
Yeah, so
That's certainly what we think.
yeah, I definitely am a believer in that, man. I signed up for that. So I was negotiating contracts, access agreements for cable with the residential marketplace. So college campuses, hospitals, other schools, and then anything that was known as MDUs, which is multiple dwelling units. So large apartment complexes, condominiums, and here in property management, you know what that's like. So the bigger players in the industry, we either will do revenue share with, or we'll do some kind of amenities in order to be the prime provider on their property.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's how that worked out. So I was there for 2 years in Seattle, and Seattle was, I hate to say this, very similar to New York. To be politically correct, I'll have to say that, but it was worse than New York traffic, and it all went back to, the whole idea of city planning. See, in New York, we had somebody in the 30s, a guy named Robert Moses, and he was like an empire builder. I think it's Robert Cano wrote a great book about him. Robert Caro or Cano, I forgot the author's name. But the guys in Seattle and Olympia decided when the feds were trying to build a more robust transportation network around Seattle that they wanted to forego the federal money and do it at their own pace the way they wanted to do it.
Interesting.
So they really messed up the whole planning for the future thing. So now when you're over on the west side, like the Puget Sound area, it takes, and this is not an exaggeration, this is about 2.5 times amount of time on the road commuting than you would in, of all places, New York City.
Wow.
Because of the planning, the routes, the availability of parallel routes heading north and south and southeast and southwest and northeast and northwest within that big mega metroplex. They've got it not locked down, but they had a much more workable plan for growth than the Puget Sound area. So I was happy to get here. And really the fulcrum for that was our family, going back to family again.
Yeah.
Our oldest grandchild just became a teenager. And we had discussions at dinner, my wife and I, that what are we doing? Are we going to wait until they're all out on their own? And we decided last year, 2 years ago out now actually, to make the move. And we couldn't be happier.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
Well, you guys certainly seem to have just settled in, like you've been here forever.
And know all the
Obviously, you've been
restaurants.
visiting a long time. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That was going to be one of the questions because obviously with social media and other things, we see that you're always promoting restaurants and different places to eat. And
Yeah.
what are some of your favorite spots
Oh, I got
to
to tell
head
you,
around here?
right now, for me personally, I can't speak for Levada, but for me, and this is, of course, before the whole COVID-19, shelter in place, stay at home, and the restrictions that we currently have, I used to like to go to Lodgepole because I love oysters. When we were living over in the Puget Sound area, we would make day trips out of going to places like Hamma Hamma Oysters, which is on the Hood Canal side. So you take a ferry over to the Olympic Peninsula, and then you drive down. The Hood Canal happens to be the only fjord in the lower 48 states. There are fjords in Alaska, but the only fjord in the lower 48 is the Hood Canal.
And so you go across the Puget Sound,
Right.
to the Olympic Peninsula.
Drive around the Olympic Peninsula.
So it's around the other side.
It's
the
kind of
Olympic
on the other side,
Okay.
yeah, and it's definitely on the western side of the Hood Canal. So Hamma Hamma Oysters is there. And Taylor Shellfish Farms, which is up in Samish Bay area, which is closer to, I don't want to say Bellingham, but it's closer to Bellingham. It's way north of Seattle. is another great place to go and have oysters. It's like Oyster Bay, Long Island was the epicenter of the oyster business, the oyster trade in the United States for a very, very long time. And that's right there on Long Island, Oyster Bay. It's where Teddy Roosevelt Sagamore Hill is in Oyster Bay. It's the Gold Coast where the Great Gatsby was set. So all the wealth of Long Island and the whole New York region was the North Shore, and Oyster Bay and Glen Cove are those areas. So we never had oysters in New York because it was depleted by time, we
Really?
came up and, there's no oysters in New York.
Wow.
Wow.
It's a fledgling industry there. But on the West Coast, Samish Bay is where they started the West Coast oyster industry. And so like the last vestiges of it are Taylor Shellfish Farms. So it's a beautiful drive down Chuckanut Drive in that area. It's super scenic, and you wind up where you can turn off like a little dirt road and a little like iron bridge to get to Samish Bay, where the Taylor Shellfish Farms kind of originated. It's got its own little whistle stop on a little tiny railroad system, like a little spike out leg of the railroad system there. But it's a great place. So I happen to like Lodgepole because they get fresh oysters in. And so that's like my favorite.
So is that the top of your list when
As soon as
all
they're
these
open.
restrictions get lifted, like heading for oysters at Lodgepole?
That's right. Even before that, because I talked to the sommelier, and he was telling me, he goes, oh yeah, we get our oysters in like 2 or 3 times a week.
Oh wow.
Nice.
Like in Missoula, Montana, when I was based in Missoula, there's a restaurant called Finn and Porter. It's on the Clark River, and you get to see, it's a great venue with a huge deck that you can sit out on. And they used to get the oysters flown in to the airport from the Puget Sound area. So, and I was not a big oyster eater as a kid, but now, so that's my favorite place. Yes, Lodgepole right now rules supreme because of the fresh oysters.
That's awesome.
But I love all the restaurants here in town. I really believe in, if you look at anything that I do social media wise, especially when this whole thing hit, it's like we don't want to lose that industry in this town. It is not easy to start up. Being in family businesses and struggling through all that, whether it's the restaurant industry or anything else, it's a tough row to hoe. And when you have the opportunity and you get established and something comes out of left field like this and hits it, it's really hard because so many of the people that are working in that industry, it's just a difficult thing to recover from. So I always do what I can to try to support the local restaurant industry. And the big food, the big box food places are as equally important. Well, I wouldn't say equally as important, but I definitely feel there's a place for them. But the local restaurant scene is just a gem, and you don't want to lose that.
Yeah, well, it's such a unique part of our town, and something that's really in the last 10 years has grown up, and so it would be a major setback. We're hoping that soon we'll all be gathering in restaurants again.
Yeah, but there's not one in town that I would say, I don't know about that place. I mean, every place here.
For such a small town, it's amazing.
It is. It's crazy amazing because imagine now, here's a guy, a native New Yorker, right, that used to work in Manhattan, had access to all this different food from all over the place. I mean, a lot of foodies will tell you that in Queens is like the epicenter of as multinational a food experience as you can find anywhere in the United States of America. You would think Manhattan, but it's not. It's like Queens. The borough of Queens is around Northern Boulevard, all over the place. Here, they are right in league with anybody else. Everybody here, and I think it's because globally, I mean, we are becoming more and more of a village. You're going to find good chefs, and you're going to find people that are really dedicated to their craft almost anywhere now. Yeah. But I love our local food scene, so much for plugging it, right?
That's right. Yeah, well, we're about out of time.
Yeah.
So we could sit here and talk for hours, and we'll have to.
You'll
Sorry
just
to
have
have more
to,
stories.
no, you
We'll
just
have
have
to
to
do
call
that
Kris
next
up
time.
and ask for more stories.
Yeah.
That's right.
They, it's funny. The stories come naturally. It's based off of what's being discussed at the time. There are I literally have a Rolodex of stories for almost every experience you can imagine. So,
Well, that experience
invite
is
me back.
hugely valuable, and we'll have
Me
you
too.
back.
Yeah.
And we're so grateful to have you on the team here and
I love you
advocating for your
guys.
clients and taking great care of your
Taking great care
clients.
of
And
people.
I hate
So
to be
we're-
mushy about it, but you know what? I had my druthers. I would say a limited. I had my druthers as to what I was going to do and where I was going to cast my lot and throw my hat in the ring, if you will. And there are many reasons why I'm at Kestrel Realty, and mainly it's because the whole family aspect and the ethics and the dedication to serving people and really embracing that idea of being people's guide. Because it's a daunting task for people to try to navigate the purchase of real property without a guide. And you want people to care for you doing that, So, I mean, that's what it's all about for me. I don't have to make my bones, But if I did, I would still want to be here I have to make my bones every day. But that's the challenge of being, working for yourself under the umbrella of other entrepreneurs. There's nothing better than that entrepreneurial spirit. That gets the blood flowing in the morning for me. And it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the kind words.
Well, thanks, Kris.
Thanks, Kris.
Thanks for joining us. Like, share, subscribe. We'll see you next week.